we have good conversations here. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm trying to have good conversations to get you guys thinking outside of the box, get you thinking of your own accord and not someone else's. So, the idea with capitalism is that it's closer to nature than, say, something like socialism, in that a large amount of the resources tend to end up into a small amount of individuals, organisms, however you want to call it. And I gave the example in the previous video, like 95% of the biomass of a rainforest is contained in 2% of the organisms. Example, a redwood forest, 100 redwood trees is the equivalent of 10 million different individual organisms. The ants and the slugs and the birds and the beasts and all the other flowers and plants. The redwood trees alone consume a stockpile, the vast majority of the resources. Now, the criticism I got from that was, Keith, I see your point. However, with nature, there seems to be a sort of, or the example was, well, with the redwood tree provides oxygen, right? So it's giving back to the ecosystem. Whereas humans, we just take and don't necessarily give back. But again, think of parasites. So a parasite, by definition, is something that takes from its host without giving back. So a symbiotic relationship would be a give and take. A parasitic relationship would be take and not give. An example would be this really cool mushroom. It's called the ghost mushroom, and it glows in the dark. It's super cool, but it's a parasitic mushroom, right? So it kills the host tree without giving anything to the tree, and it moves on again. So there's countless quote unquote parasitic organisms, and you can say, well, the tree, I'm playing devil's advocate to myself, the tree that was killed by the ghost fungus decomposes into soil, in which so the fungus is basically creating soil so that things can grow out. So even though, yes, it's a parasitic organism, somewhere along the line it still helps the environment somehow, even though it is a parasite and kills its host. There's two things to that. One, you can't say humans aren't natural, capitalism isn't natural because it doesn't give, because it has a sort of parasitic relationship to its environment. Because I just gave you one example, and there's countless others of other parasitic organisms that take and do not give. Well, humans, I wanted to make another video, and I guess I'll include it in this one, and why I'm down for burning fossil fuels, burning coal. Maybe there's a better solution, but hear me out. You could say, okay, where humans are burning coal and oil, releasing CO2 into the atmosphere. The CO2 in the atmosphere raises the temperature, it kills the polar bears. This blade of grass right now is undergoing something called photosynthesis. The sunlight comes, it strikes the organelles within the blade of grass, the chloroplasts and the chlorophyll, and the energy from the sun converts a whole bunch of stuff. But it takes in CO2 from the air, splits off the oxygen, releases the oxygen, captures the carbon in itself. This is made, the leaf is made from carbon from the atmosphere. That's the majority of what you're feeling when you pick up organic material is carbon from the atmosphere. Photosynthesis stops at 150 parts per million. There's a 250 per million. Is it 250 or 100? Maybe it's 250 per million. 10,000 BC, we were at 275 parts per million. We were 25 parts per million away from photosynthesis coming to a screeching halt 10,000 BC. Why? Well, all the carbon was trapped in the coral reefs, so people say, oh, well, we're killing the Great Barrier Reef, it's all climate change. We got to halt CO2 because the Great Barrier Reefs are so beautiful. They're so beautiful, and we're losing them, and they're turning gray, and the humanity. The coral reefs were starving the planet of carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide dissolves into the ocean, as you guys know, and is captured by ocean organisms as calcium carbonate. Think snail shells, think coral reefs. what happened is the coral reefs around the planet were growing. They were capturing more CO2. Oil, coal, old plant and animal remains trapped under the ground, buried. So what was at 1,000 parts per million a few million years ago? Photosynthesis was thriving. Now it's down to 250, 275. Now I believe it's up to about 450 since the Industrial Revolution. But photosynthesis operates pristine levels at 1,000 parts per million. Ask anyone who's ever grown in a greenhouse. You supplement your plants with CO2 so they grow bigger, they grow faster, they grow more disease resistant, more pest resistant, higher nutritional content of the food. We can associate photosynthesis, the capturing of carbon dioxide and the exhalation of oxygen, as the lungs of the planet. So I could argue, sorry that was a long rant, but I could argue that while humans are parasites and so say we take what we don't give and we're burning fossil fuels so that we're raising the temperature of the planet, killing certain organisms that have adapted to this level of CO2. But in the long run, like that ghost fungus that kills the tree but creates soil, we could be, say, killing the polar bears, but we're getting the CO2 levels back up to 1,000 parts per million. Some scientists would even argue not that CO2 is a good thing, but that plants function the best at even upwards of 1,200 parts per million. So I love growing plants. Like, look, these some black Aztec corn growing behind me. I got marigolds. I got Comanche peppers, sweet corn. I got artichokes. I got all kinds of stuff growing. I love growing shit. So the perspective that I'm looking at it is, hey, I want to grow a forest on the planet. I want this planet to be fucking goddamn Garden of Eden. What does that take? Well, first of all, the plants are starving. So if the plants require 1,000 parts per million CO2, and right now we're at about 450, 475, that means the lungs of the planet are operating at about 45% capacity. You double that, you get 2, 3, 4 times as much vegetation on the planet. You get higher oxygen levels on the planet. You guys have heard about the oxygen bars. They plug the oxygen and free radicals. You have more oxygen in your body. Your brain functions better. You're not as winded. You can fight diseases. There's all kinds of good things associated with oxygen. It's the number one fact. All you yogis know how important oxygen is. So Keith, what's your point? My point is that I still haven't come across a good argument as to how, say, something like capitalism goes against the laws of nature, or that humans somehow go against the laws of nature. Because, again, you say, well, humans are parasites. Is there even such thing as a parasite on planet Earth? And I'm not being facetious. It's sort of a rhetorical question. I don't know the answer to that. My answer is not really, because the ghost fungus is a parasite. It kills the tree but gives nothing to it. But the tree decomposes into soil, which captures water, captures nutrients. It adds humus, a humic layer full of acids to the soil so that the next generation of plants can grow bigger, grow stronger, produce more oxygen, produce more food. Humans. Okay, yeah, we're releasing CO2 and say we're killing the polar bears, we're not giving anything, but let's say humanity single-handedly takes CO2 back to 1,000 parts per million. Now, politics and, I studied environmental science at the university in San Francisco, so I was writing theses, I was writing I was paper after paper, it was all the peer-reviewed sources, I was reading everything that says, it's very anti-CO2. And then as I got older and I learned more about plants and learned more about these other ideas, I thought, why is that a bad thing that we're raising CO2? Okay, so we'll take this back. We'll say planet Earth. We'll say we do in fact kill the polar bears. Think of Gaia as a whole. Think of nature as a whole. You evolve or you die. Animals come and go out of existence by the millions, all the fucking time. All the time. Over the past millions of years, life has done nothing but either evolve or go extinct. I don't think Earth would care if the polar bears died if it could get its lungs working at 100% capacity. I wouldn't. If I was the Earth and I was like, oh, Commander Keith. I was like, yes. Commander Keith, our lungs are working at 45% capacity. We got to get the CO2 to 1,000 parts per million. But if we do, the polar bears are going to die. Probably some penguins. Maybe some fish and shit in some creeks. I'd go fucking run it, bro. Like, send the polar bears a letter. Be like, hey, you guys better move south stat or you're going to die. Do the same thing with the fish. If they die, they die, whatever. I'm trying to take planet Earth to the next level and either fucking get on board or get off. That's how planet Earth has always worked. In the last video, I talked about the dead elephant that couldn't find water, so the baby elephant died, and the mom was like crying, lamenting the death of her baby elephant. Nice. And that's just nature, right? I'm not arguing good or bad, by the way, you guys. I'm not saying capitalism is good or bad. I'm not saying baby elephants dying is good or bad. I'm just saying nature rolls a certain way. And that's not to mention, like, who knows? If the polar bears run out of food, they're going to move south, where they find more food. They'll mingle with the grizzly bears. They can cross easily. You'll get some kind of polar bear grizzly hybrid, and then the old ones that don't move south will die, and the ones that move, that do move and migrate towards more water, more land, more food, will integrate, and you'll have a new... It's not like polar bears will just go extinct. They'll most likely mingle, I think. I don't know. What fucking knows. If they're smart, they'll move south. I mean, the point of this video, I guess, is entertaining sort of thought experiments to break us out of the matrix in a way. Because no one can think for themselves anymore. Like, the arguments I'm presenting are sound fucking arguments backed up by science. Like, you can Google right now. Just pause this video, go to Google, type what CO2 levels do plants thrive at? It'll tell you 1,000 parts per million, 1,000 ppm parts per million, upwards of 1,200 ppm. That's where plants thrive. So if your ultimate goal is to take care of the planet, and ground zero for the food web of the planet is the soil, our plants, our photosynthesis, right? That's the bottom of the food train. You stop photosynthesis, you guys. You stop the entire planet. Except for the things that live on the little vents at the bottom of the ocean and shit like that. And in caves and things like that. 98% of the life in the planet, or 95% of life on planet will come to a screeching halt. And in fact, it did. It came within 25 parts per million of all photosynthesis on the planet stopping. 10,000 BC at the Younger Dryas period. Isn't that crazy? Like, is that not worth talking about? Talk about conspiracy theories. Like, if I were an alien planet, and I knew planet Earth thrived if when the oxygen levels were higher, when the CO2 was higher, I would get all my reptilian overlords to be like, we gotta stop CO2. CO2's bad. Keep it down. You can't have the temperature rising. We can't do it. It's all bad. The polar bears and the fucking penguins are all dying. I'm not saying that's the case. It's just like, isn't it interesting that? So it's one of my favorite phrases. It's like, you have to admit that that's at least interesting. You have to admit that that's at least noteworthy. You know what I mean? Because if I want a greener planet, more plants are... America has more trees on it today than it did 100 years ago. We don't have as many old growth forests. We fucked up there. But we have more trees on the continental U.S. than we did 100 years ago. Scientists are thinking, one, because the CO2 levels are up by about... What was it, 150 or was it 250? I think it was 150. Now we're at about 450. I should have looked this up before, but someone fact check me. Don't take my word for it. So we're up at least double our CO2 levels, which means trees grow. Again, trees are growing faster. The grass grows. You want to know what happens when you have more vegetation? You have more captured moisture, more captured water, which means more rainfall. The Amazon rainforest, part of the reason why it rains so much in the Amazon rainforest is because there are so many trees that they create their own weather. So back to the blade of grass. It's called transpiration. So the leaves of plants coat themselves in moisture so that and water so that the CO2 can dissolve, because water is the universal solvent. So CO2 hits a blade of grass and hits the water that's on the leaf, dissolves into the water, and then absorbs the CO2 through holes called stomata. But as a result, the water that's on the leaves evaporates into the air. So the more evaporation through plants, called transpiration, you have, the more clouds you have. So the more CO2 you have, the more plants you have. The more plants you have, the more moisture in the air you have. The more moisture in the air you have, the more plants you can grow. The more plants you can grow, the more moisture you have in the air. See what I'm saying? It's a positive feedback system. The more food you have, the higher nutritional content of food you have, more disease resistant, more pest resistant. You can easily supply the same population with half the amount of crops, nutrient and calorie density wise. You say, yeah, there's no more polar bears. Okay, well, fuck the polar bears. Now we have 20 new species of bears that exist that could never have existed before because the planet was starving to death, carbon dioxide speaking. So again, capitalism. The idea, capitalism, the idea of, but a result of capitalism is a vast majority of the resources ending up in a small amount of people's hands. And the interesting thing is that it's not even like this is a natural thing. It happens in humans too. Like, if you go to your Spotify station right now, 90% of your plays are going to come from about 5% of songs. 90 of 100 playlists that you have on Spotify, 90% of the plays are going to come from probably 2 or 3 playlists. You know what I mean? My Etsy shop, 90% of my income comes from 5% of the products. And I know it's kind of a bummer. Like, no one likes hierarchies. I feel like today's age, everyone hates hierarchies. No one likes structure or order. You know what I mean? People just want to sort of burn everything down and start from scratch. I get it. But this is just how it is. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is. Actually, I do think I know what it is. So I was reading we read a book on the channel recently. The book was called Your Forces and How to Use Them. Man, that book is phenomenal. If you guys haven't read that, you really should. You should really read that book. It talked about nature expands when it's filled its current position. Actually, that's Napoleon Hill. So Napoleon Hill and Christian Larson, both Napoleon Hill, they're both from the early 19th century. Napoleon Hill says, in nature, a species only evolves when it's filled its current capacity of space. Christian Larson says, we activate latent possibilities by filling the void, essentially. And maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe it has to do with, like, everything's trying to evolve, at least we'll say, on Earth, in this 3-dimensional plane. Everything's trying to evolve, it's trying to ascend, or it's trying to fit a new niche. But it sort of has to outgrow its own niche in order to go to the next one. Big fish, little pond sort of idea. Music is the same way. Like, as a musician, I'm poking around and I'm playing shows and stuff, and it's like, I can't expect to headline a festival in Florida if I can't even pack a bar in my hometown of Ventura, California, Oxnard, California. If I can't fill a venue here, what makes you think I can fill a venue in a different state? Like, no, I have to accumulate as much as I can here to where I can't be contained anymore, and then I can flow out into other sectors of the world. And maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe that has something to do with the evolution of species and organisms on planet Earth, is that you have to, that those species, those organisms have to gather as much resources as they can to where they're exploding from their niche, and they're forced to expand into other areas. Planet Earth, you're not gonna go from sticks and stones to colonizing Mars. No, you're gonna colonize, or you're gonna grow your village. Right? Then you're gonna expand your village into, say, some feudal states, to an empire, to United Nations, so to speak. Then you're colonizing your whole planet. Then then you're sending people off to the moon. You've done your moon thing. Now you're colonizing Mars. Okay, now you're trying to colonize Venus. You know what I mean? You have an abundance of something in one spot, and then you're able. This is how nature works, and I'm thinking maybe that's what capitalism does too. Like right now, we're experiencing the dark side of capitalism, wherein the 1% that control most of the resources tend to be corrupt motherfuckers. Like we're being led by the ghost fungus parasites, when we should be led by the redwood trees, for example. Redwood trees, one redwood tree disproportionately has access to more resources than anything else, by far. But it's also giving back a lot more than, say, the ghost fungus, right? Which is a parasite. It gets on a tree, kills the tree, gives nothing to the tree, moves on to the next tree, wipes it out, moves on to the next one. So right now, capitalism is like run by the ghost fungus, where we want to have capitalism led by the redwood tree. Keeping the same principles in place, why fight nature, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. Just get a different kind of wheel that's more necessary for the direction that you want to go in. I saw someone left a comment on the last video, but they deleted it. I came in probably harder than I should have, but who cares? They were like, you're missing the point. Capitalism they were just like, it's evil. It may or may not be, but it was a lazy argument. He didn't address anything that was worth addressing. He wasn't speaking from his own mind. It was like, it's basically a spokesperson for his ideology. I don't know, man. I'm trying to grow forest out here, you guys. Don't get me wrong. Like, I'll hug a tree. You know what I mean? I'll hug a few trees. I'm all about it. I'm down for the cause. Just trying to do it right. So thanks for being here. My name's Keith, Man of Letters. See you guys in the next video. Thanks for being subscribed. Do all things. All right, peace out, you guys. Peace out.